let's get reaction now from Representative Marlin Stutzman from the great state of Indiana. So, I'm old enough, Representative, to remember when everybody during the Trump impeachments were saying that impeachment is a quasi-political exercise and you don't have to have any kind of legal basis. It's totally political, and it's totally fine to impeach Donald Trump. So is that just the standard only for Republicans? And now the Chief Justice is suggesting something different for an Obama-appointed judge? I mean, that's kind of how I see what's going on here. And good morning.
Apparently so, Jenna. Great to be with you again this morning. Yeah, this is so ironic watching the whole narrative with President Trump back in office and a Republican House and Senate, and, to see the narrative that, what's good for me is not good for thee. And that's what the Democrats on the left have been doing for so many years. We put up a post yesterday about President Obama talking about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse at high numbers. And so that kind of reminded us of the DOJ team and what DOJ is doing. And Nancy Pelosi supported it, and so did some others. But, yeah, these federal judges, simply sit on their perch and like to put out their decrees on what they believe America should be. And, I agree with Justice Roberts to a point. It's like, but you know what? You're the justice. You're the Supreme Court justice. You should be speaking to the judiciary as well. Not just to the executive or legislative branch, but speak to the judiciary and keep them in their lane. And so for them to try to, for a judge to try to tell the executive, I mean, this is not even the Supreme Court justice that was telling the judge to turn the plane around. This was a low-level court judge that was trying to tell the president of the United States, elected by the whole country, to turn those planes around, bring those prisoners back. They haven't had due process. That's just malarkey. And so I think that the president is right to do what he's doing. He's keeping America safe, and he's really, truly representing the voice of the people after this past election.
And what a great point, Representative, to say that, that Chief Justice John Roberts should be talking to the judiciary, not taking swipes at a co-equal or at least coordinate branch, because this did appear to be a political statement, which undermines the legitimacy of his statement altogether. And I agree with you that I'm not just for impeaching judges kind of willy-nilly, like, oh, we disagree with their opinion, so they're gone. No, it's if they actually violate their oath of office. And, Article 3 provides for lifetime tenure on good behavior. But what exactly does that mean? I don't think has ever been clearly defined by the Supreme Court itself, which is ironic. But I'm all for impeaching judges when they step over their authority, as this district court clearly did. So your colleague, Representative Brandon Gill, who I'm a huge fan of, I think he's doing a phenomenal job as a freshman congressman. Do you support the articles of impeachment that he's filing?
Yeah, first of all, I'll give shout out to Brandon Gill, great guy, great family, and is a rising star in the Republican Party. And I told him yesterday, put me on as a sponsor of his articles of impeachment. And here's why. It's, we know it's likely not going to happen because we can't get 67 votes in the Senate. But the fact has to be made, and this is why it's so important to push back, because if we don't push back, they're going to continue to do these ridiculous rulings. And there has to be a message sent to the other branch, the judiciary branch, that we're watching. And there is a group of us in the House, and I'm sure there's a group in the Senate as well, that are tired of these judges legislating from the bench. And it does become political. I had the chance to go to dinner one time with Justice Scalia, and Trey Gowdy actually set it up. It was an incredible, surreal moment to be having dinner with Justice Scalia. And this is about 10, 15 years ago. And he told us one thing that I'll never forget. He's like, don't let yourselves think that the judiciary isn't political. He's like, we go to the same cocktail parties. We love to go talk about what's going on in the political world and around Washington, D.C. And so that's just always stuck with me, is while they are supposed to be impartial, they are still human, and they still are in the political world and government. So I'm not surprised, that, and I think we'll probably see more of this, that the Democrats and the left are going to continue just to run to the judiciary, because they're going to run to these lower courts, too. That's where they have their friends to get the decisions handed down that they want to fit their narrative, to say that President Trump is out of line. So I support Brandon doing this, and I'm going to help him do whatever I can, because we have to push back on these guys that are trying to govern from their little perch wherever they're at.
Excellent. And I fully support that. And I'm also totally fangirling over the fact that you got to have dinner with Justice Scalia. That's amazing. I got to meet him very briefly one time in law school. He came for a Federalist Society event, and I was just so overwhelmed. I think I could barely get out like, "Hello, Mr. Justice," and that was about it. But he was very kind. And
I don't get starstruck very often, but I sure did that night with him.
I can imagine. And I wish that we had someone in the Chief Justice role and that seat that understood those realities like Justice Scalia articulated, because, you're absolutely right that they're in D.C. and so they're going to the same, parties and things, and they're still humans. They're still affected, and by politics, they still have political views, even though they're supposed to set them aside. So, this raises an interesting question that has been kind of kicked around in conservative circles for a while about, moving the Supreme Court out of D.C. and, kind of revamping the entire judiciary, and perhaps, revisiting some of the ways, certainly, that like under the Judiciary Act, which Congress has control over, but even amending the Constitution through either Congress or the states in the Article 5 process. What's your view on judicial reform to maybe try to cure some of these problems that, obviously the founders did their best on some of these things, but they couldn't have remotely anticipated what the world looks like today in terms of how politics is just a 24/7 news cycle that these justices are immersed in, like we all are?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jenna, and one that I think would be really tough to tackle. It's kind of like going back to the original intent was for our U.S. senators to be elected by our state legislative bodies rather than having them elected as a whole from our states. And I think there was a lot of wisdom in that decision and why they were elected by the state legislative bodies rather than from the popular vote in each particular state. I think when it comes to judicial reform as well, the founding fathers, and I'd love to go on Capitol tours with David Barton, who has so much history. Just it's incredible to hear the history from him and what the founding fathers wanted with the Supreme Court. They didn't even have a spot in their own, they didn't have their own building across the street from the Capitol. They had to meet at a downtown tavern, and then they finally got a spot in the basement of the Capitol. Then eventually they got their own ivory tower across the street. And, we do, and again, I am grateful for the court that we have at this point being a conservative court, and again, thanks to Donald Trump. And the fact that Roe versus Wade was overturned, and now we can fight the abortion issue at the state level. But I think that what needs to be reminded, and this is where even Justice John Roberts should recall, that what's going to happen when there's a question about the auto pen in the Oval Office after this past administration? We don't know who was in charge. So I think it'd be better if they just, be quiet. And, when these cases come to them, they have to make a very objective decision. And I think that's what we all have to remind ourselves, is that it can't be just targeted towards one administration because maybe you don't like the personality. Because let's go back to the past administration where we don't know even who was running the White House. And so there's going to be a lot of questions that come forward. And I think Trump is doing the right thing by, just bringing one decision after the other. And he knows that some of them are going to get struck down by the courts. But we're just going to have to fight through that right now, because those are the circumstances and that's the playing field. and we're not going to whine about it. We're just going to keep fighting through, unlike them, where they want to stack the court. They want to, they want to move the court to the left, if anything. So I'm so grateful for the conditions that we have right now and the circumstances in D.C. that we've got a conservative president who's willing to fight, and we've got the House and the Senate. We've been sticking together, getting the agenda passed that the American people elected Trump to do.
And I'm speaking with Representative Marlin Stutzman from the great state of Indiana. And, the commentary by Chief Justice Roberts when he said that there aren't, Obama judges or Trump judges, there's just Article 3 judges. It seems like, that should be true in theory, but it's really not when you look at the forum selection and the venue selection that the Democrats, run to their preferred judges that they know are going to rule for them, like this Boasberg guy. And so how do we move forward with a judiciary that is so divided? And thankfully, we have the majority on the Supreme Court. Maybe I kind of think it's a 3-3-3, where you have three solid conservatives generally, but there's always kind of this question mark of where we're going to get the majority, and it shouldn't be a matter of politics or outcome preferred. It should just be a matter of following the law, and we should all at least agree on what the Constitution and the law says. It shouldn't be so political, but where do we go when we have a judiciary that is so divided, that is trying to, literally turn planes around in the middle of the air and not allow the executive to do its job?
I think part of it, Jenna, is in the confirmation process. The fact that we've seen this now all the way back to Mr. Bork when he was nominated to the Supreme Court and what they did to him. We have to have honest brokers in the Senate in these confirmation hearings in the process. And this is where I think the Democrats, they play by a different set of rules. And we just have to realize that. And we don't have to stoop to their level. But at the same time, that's why I think we're winning. I think the American people are finally catching on to the Democrats' game. They will throw anything at a nominee for the Supreme Court if it comes from a Republican president. And it's a very different strategy when it's from a Democrat president, where Republican senators generally vote for the nominee because they believe, and this is, Senator Lugar from Indiana always had this opinion, that it's the president's choice and that he's going to defer to the president unless there's something so obvious that that person doesn't deserve to be on the court. But the Democrats don't play that way. They make things up. They lie. They will do whatever it takes to keep a conservative off the bench. And so we have been better at preparing for that. But I think that's why the American people are the ones that are going to help fix this problem by basically letting the Democrat Party know that they're out of touch, they're out of line, and that's not the way that we want government to behave or act. And, the media has been the biggest accomplice in this. They've been the ones pushing the narrative out there. It's just incredible to me that yesterday was one of the most historic days in our nation's history, with the astronauts coming back from the International Space Station, and yet some of the major networks couldn't even cover the moment because it would give Elon Musk credit, it would give President Trump credit, and the fact that Elon Musk asked and offered the past administration the ability to go get the stranded astronauts on the space station, and it was declined. Again, where is the outrage on the left with that? Again, they're more worried about President Trump getting credit for doing things that we all would expect as Americans to have done by our leaders. But there's no outrage when we find out that President Biden turned down the offer from what he perceived as a political opponent. So, again, the hypocrisy is real. And I think the American people are starting to sniff it out. And that's why the 2026 election is going to be such a big one, because I think that's going to determine whether or not the American people say, hey, we want adults in the room running our government rather than hypocrites that continue to see it only their way.
Yeah, so true. The Democrats are too busy calling Americans greedy for wanting to keep more of our hard-earned dollars, like Chuck Schumer, and also selling their Teslas, like Representative Mark Kelly. And I have to ask you this before we let you go. You have offered to buy Mark Kelly's Tesla, and this has been kind of a back and forth on Twitter or X now that is actually hilarious. What's the story behind that?
Well, I saw his video, and again, it's one of those videos that the Democrats like to post that, they're start swearing and they start calling, names and, and not just names, it's like profanity. And so it's like, okay, you all went out and bought Teslas, you all went and bought EVs, and Elon Musk makes the coolest EV on the market, and his was a pretty nice one. And of course, I think a lot of it's virtue signaling, because then he turns around and he buys a Tahoe, which, hey, great American vehicle as well. But is it about the environment, or is it about the politics of the person who owns Tesla? And of course, that's what it is. And so when I saw that he was going to sell the Tesla, I was like, hey, I want that one. That's a nice car. And so we tagged him in a post and asked him if he'd be willing to sell it. I wanted to know how many miles were on it and if it was a single car, one owner car. And we never got a response back. He apparently went and traded it in on a Tahoe. But again, it goes back to the left. If it fits their narrative, they're all about it. But as soon as somebody on the other side pushes back and calls them out, and what Doge is doing to reveal their ridiculous spending, their fraudulent spending and corruption, they start screaming and hollering that Elon Musk is all of a sudden a bad guy. And so I would have loved to own it, even if it would have been Mark Kelly's car, because it looked like a pretty nice Tesla to me.
Yeah, well, all I'll say to Mark Kelly is big mistake. Big, huge. So Representative Marlin Stutzman, always appreciate your time, sir.